welcome all. Thank you so much for coming. It's awesome. I'm Tyler. This is a meeting put on by the Washington Berniecrats. We've got Adam Smith, seated congressman in CD9, and Sarah Smith running for the same office. I won't take much of the floor. I guess I'm just going to let you guys introduce yourselves. And I guess I'll sneak in one question while we're at it. And that is, I want to know where both of you stand on this whole concept of the split vote. Is the system fundamentally broken? Does it work fine as it is? Do we need to worry about it in this race, in every race? Do we need to sweeping reforms or keep it as it is? You guys know what I'm asking here. Anyway, without further ado.
No, I know. I actually, I'm sorry. What do you mean exactly by split vote?
Well, I'm more asking for an introduction and sneaking in the question. When we have multiple candidates running, on the left end of the political spectrum, there's a risk there involved. What is the answer to that kind of conundrum that we've seen? Anyway, that's my personal question. So without further ado, Adam, if you want to go for it, welcome and thanks for being here. I'm going to give you the floor.
Sure. Well, thanks to the guys for having me on. And actually, I don't think there's any problem whatsoever with the split vote situation. I believe in competition. I believe that it's good for the party to have a bunch of different people with different ideas run. And every individual, every Democrat, every progressive, every person voting in the district then has to decide who the best candidate is. So I don't think it's a problem at all. I think it's representative democracy at work, and it's the way it ought to be. It's always my firm belief that I am the best person to represent the 9th District, and I'm doing the best job, will continue to do the best job, but I got to make that case. So I don't have a problem whatsoever. If you have more than one Democrat running in a race, I don't think all Democrats should just sit on the sideline. Now, I do understand that the greatest threat that we face right now comes from Donald Trump and the Republican Congress. We see it every day. They're certainly on clean energy. This week has been the biggest one, just rolling back all of the progress that we have made, and we need to stay focused on that. But I honestly believe we can do both, and I think we're better if we do. We're better if we have a robust debate within the progressive movement about who best to represent us, what the issues are, and what the ideas are, and also focus on defeating Donald Trump's agenda and the agenda of the Republican Party. Final thing I'll say on this note, as we go forward, one of the questions you said that you really wanted to focus on here was, what's the future of the Democratic Party? And in sum, we have to build a coalition large enough to win elections and govern. But I think we build that coalition on ideas, not on people. What do we stand for? What are we going to do to bring universal access to health care to everybody? What are we going to do to make sure that Social Security and Medicare are preserved? Well, Medicare ties into healthcare, but Social Security is preserved for all time. What are we going to do to give people access to the education and the job training that is necessary? What are we going to do to address the income gap and hold corporations accountable for the way they treat workers in the environment, among other things? As long as we have an issue-oriented discussion, I think you get more better ideas from a diverse group of people, and eventually we are stronger. Now, once we're done with that debate, the key is we then have to be united going forward. But part of being united is addressing the issues that people are concerned about. Look, you have a primary, someone wins, and they ignore an entire chunk of the party and ignore the issues that are important to them, then I don't think you can come along and say, well, we got to be united. The issues matter, and it's on the issues that we're going to win. It's on the issues that we're going to build the coalition necessary to be successful.
Great, thanks. That's Adam Smith, seated representative, CD9. Sarah, you want to follow up?
Sure, yeah. So I agree pretty much that I absolutely think that competition in a primary is very important. It significantly strengthens the party itself. It significantly strengthens the voting pool. It brings in new voters. It re-engages disenfranchised voters. Look at what Bernie's legacy is. That's what he did. He engaged a whole demographic of people to come out and become engaged and start joining in local politics and things like that. And so I understand. I agree with Adam that we do need to. It is about the issues. It's about the issues that we're debating, but it's more than that. It's also about the solutions that we're bringing to the table. So it's not just about candidates that are running that are going to be talking about issues. It's about candidates that are running that are talking about progressive solutions. So we need to make sure that we're not just focusing on what the problem is, but we're focusing on how we're going to be fixing it as well. So I think by and large, having more people in a primary engages us in that discussion. It expands that discussion to more people, and it brings more people to the table and more voices to the table, which is really what we need. We're looking for a representative democracy. We're looking for a democracy that's of the people, for the people, and by the people. And if the people wind up choosing one candidate over another in the primary section to move forwards into the general, then I think that's what we need to obey, is the will of the people, because that's what it's about. We're here to serve our constituents in our district. We're not here to serve ourselves.
Great, thank you both. Oz, you ready? I'm gonna hand to you if you're ready.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I would like to expand on the point of building unity, a coalition going forward. One of the main housekeeping issues from the last election cycle, since Congressman Smith brought up Donald Trump and his agenda, was the primary election. And the Berniecrats basically have been formed through that primary process after the election cycle of 2016. My question to you both is, can you explain why the superdelegate system is being utilized in the Democratic Party primary to select presidential candidates to run in the general election? Isn't that contrary to using a democratic system of one vote, one voter? If you disagree with this in premise, the way I parsed it, please explain, and I will let who's going to take them.
But I went first last time, so I think Sarah should be able to go first this time.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I'm happy to go first. So I think the superdelegate system, for lack of a better word, is crazy. I think as of right now, it absolutely robs the voice of Democratic voters, and it's part of what's causing so much dissent in the Democratic Party. We're seeing registered Democrats who are upset and angry. Like, look at the state of Washington. We caucus 72.7% in favor of Bernie Sanders, and all of our superdelegates, including Representative Smith, voted for Hillary. And that basically took that 72.7% and drowned out our voice. Our whole state wasn't listened to. Our district wasn't listened to. So the superdelegate system is really just a way for establishment line toters to keep their control. It keeps their power in their fists. It gives the illusion of the people having power, but the reality is that they don't when we have a superdelegate system. It's absolutely unconscionable that we would have that, and we wouldn't tie our superdelegates to the will of their districts. It just opens up and leaves a lot of space for representatives to talk about how the will of the party supersedes the will of their people, and how they don't need to listen to what the majority of their constituents did in a caucus. And I just think that's fundamentally wrong, not just as part of the party, but as part of our democratic system as a whole. It goes against the entire spirit of our system, and it absolutely has no place in a modern democracy.
So I think it's 4 quick points I'd like to make. First of all, we should do away with superdelegates. I completely agree with that. I've said that from the very beginning. There is no point in having them. I do, however, disagree that the superdelegate process disenfranchised the voters in the state of Washington. More of our delegates, far more of our delegates were selected through the caucus process. And if you listen to what Sarah just said, you would have gotten the impression that they didn't get any votes, that only the superdelegates got votes. Actually, every caucus, every congressional district, and statewide selected delegates, and so the people did get their voice and did get their votes and did get their superdelegates did get their delegates put in place. There were more elected delegates to the process, far more. I forget what the number was, but 4 or 5 times as many as there were superdelegates. So it's a mistake to leave the impression that somehow the caucus was irrelevant. It elected a lot of delegates, sent them to the convention. Third point I'd like to make is, again, we need to get rid of the superdelegate process. But when we're talking about building unity, and I think Sarah was absolutely right in her answer to the first question, and that's really what I meant, is solutions to those problems. Healthcare. I support Medicare for all. I support getting to a universal access system. I supported the Affordable Care Act as a step to getting there. I support the free college tuition bill that Representative Jayapal has introduced on issue after issue. The solutions are what matters. And I want us to focus on that moving forward. One of the best and easiest ways to focus on that is to get rid of the superdelegate process. Now, understand that nationwide, superdelegates have not decided any of our elections. Hillary Clinton won more pledged elected delegates than Bernie Sanders did nationwide. She did. So to give the impression that the superdelegates are the only reason that Hillary won is wrong. The delegates that are elected state by state, sometimes in primaries, sometimes in caucuses. And let me say one other thing about disenfranchisement. I think the caucus system itself is incredibly disenfranchising because it happens on one Saturday. In this case, the meetings for like 6 to 8 hours. If you happen to work, if you have family responsibilities, you have no chance to vote. The caucuses, the superdelegates should be gotten rid of. The caucus system should be gotten rid of. And we should have a primary so that more people can have their voice heard. Now, in the state of Washington, we have the unusual thing where we do have a primary. Now, it doesn't count. It doesn't elect Democrats. But in my district, 3 times as many people voted in the primary as voted in the caucus. Why? Because it's easier. You know, you get a ballot in the mail and you get to vote, as opposed to going and standing in school someplace for 7 hours. So if you want to talk about disenfranchising, our caucus system is incredibly disenfranchising. You know, if you're old, if you have a disability, can you really put in 7 hours in a school in order to have your voice heard? So yes, get rid of superdelegates, but I also think we should get rid of the caucus system so that we can have more Democrats and more progressives have their voice heard in who should be our presidential candidate.
Thank you both for your response to that question. I want to hand it over to Tambourine now, and thanks again.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Yes.
See me okay?
Yes.
So before I move to the first question from our Facebook audience, I just want to have a little caveat in regard to that last subject matter. Being a national Bernie delegate myself, I just would say that I would think that the main point that has the most gravity to it as it pertains to the superdelegate question is that we're living in an age now where the people, the voters, have outgrown the situation where the representatives that they have put into office turn a deaf ear to their choice. And so we can say many things, I believe, about last year's primary in regard to why Hillary Clinton got the nomination. But as far as it pertains to the superdelegates, the bottom line is that this state, as I believe Sarah gave the number, 72.7% of the state overwhelmingly went for Bernie. And unfortunately, though every single one of the elected superdelegates went for Hillary Clinton. So it's the rub in regard to that.
Well,
people want their representatives to vote with yes?
Yeah, okay. Look, I think the most important thing, as I said before, is that we move forward and work together to put together a positive agenda. But if we're going to have this discussion, I have to have this discussion. And again, the simplest and best thing to do. You're absolutely right. There shouldn't have been superdelegates last time. There should not be superdelegates. I sincerely hope the DNC has learned their lesson. I will lobby that way. But I disagree wholeheartedly with the notion that I ignored the will of my constituents. And I will tell you why. Because we did have a primary. We did have a thing where people were given a ballot. It was sent to them. They could check a box and they could vote more easily than going through a caucus system. And in my district, Hillary Clinton won that primary with 60% of the vote in a primary where 3 times as many of my constituents voted as in the caucus. So if I've got an election where 3 times as many people voted and 60% went for Hillary, but in a caucus, 70% went for Bernie, then it's a lot tougher question than just saying I ignored them, which is why, again, and none of you have addressed this issue, the caucuses are disenfranchising. The caucuses themselves are unfair to the voters that I represent. And the disparity in the results between the primary election in our state and the caucus only make that point 100% clear.
Indeed, and you are correct. Both need to be done away with. But as you said also, the primary really doesn't count. It's known as a beauty contest. So
yes, but the people voted. They voted. You're
right,
saying their votes don't count because of the Democratic Party rule?
We're a caucus state. So it was the caucus that determined who was going to be the nominee, correct?
But, well, yes, but we're talking about representing the voices of the people in the district. We're talking more broadly than just about, I mean, you're just sort of throwing the rules out there. I mean, the superdelegates are in the rules too, but that's wrong. Okay.
Well, isn't it true? I just am curious. Isn't it true that each superdelegate is equal to 8,000 constituents?
Yeah, I have no idea. I do know that there are fewer superdelegates than there are pledged delegates by a fairly comfortable margin. I don't know. I mean, gosh, as a superdelegate, I represent 700,000 people in Congress. And look, I never asked to be a superdelegate. I never wanted to be a superdelegate. Never wanted anything to do with that.
Okay, well, fair enough. I mean, I know we don't have a whole lot of time, so I'll move on to the first question from Facebook. This is from another National Bernie delegate, Dean McGrath, who represents the strong union supporter. He says, do you support, and this is to both of you, do you support U.S. spending $700 billion on the military budget when so many more things could be achieved for Americans at home with that money, i.e. education, single payer, healthcare? Sarah, do you want to go first? Or Adam, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I'll just answer quickly. No, I don't. That's why I voted against the defense appropriations bill the last 3 years until when we came back after that, we got a smaller number. This year, the defense appropriations bill was $696 billion, and I voted against it. I don't think the number should be that big.
Awesome. Sarah?
I absolutely think our military budget is overinflated currently. We don't have civilian oversight. We don't have any kind of audits that we do regularly on our military budget. The last audit that we received, I think there was a $3.6 trillion amount that was just gone. It was just missing. It just was completely unaccounted for. And $3.6 trillion is, as I'm sure many of you know, more than 2 times the amount of the total outstanding student debt bubble. So right now we have a runaway military budget. We just had the vote pass the House that I do believe, I believe my records indicated that Smith actually voted in favor of the military budget, which provided $72 billion in an increase to, which is more than what Donald Trump was asking for military spending. So I believe that we are grossly overspending on our military budget. We have very little oversight on what's being spent and how it's being spent. I believe there was something I read recently too about a shipment of uniforms that went to the wrong place. We have so many extra stockpiles of munitions and things like that. And now we're entering a position where I believe Congressman Smith is also working on HR 3025, which is intended to help beef up our stockpiles some more against Russia overseas by providing more bombs and more guns to our bases in Europe, which is going to cost more and more money. And I just think someone needs to put their foot down and say this spending is out of control. We need to do something about it. We have problems at home. We need to be fighting. We have battles at home we've got to fight. We've got to fight the battle against income inequality, the battle for healthcare, the battle for access to education. We have things at home we need to concern ourselves with as well that are just as much as a threat to the people as threats abroad.
Representative Smith, would you like to respond?
Yeah, sure. I voted against the defense appropriations bill. What Sarah is referring to is the defense authorizing bill. The defense authorizing bill has to do with policy. And yes, it has a budget number in it as well, but it is the defense appropriations bill that sets the number. The authorizing bill, for instance, one of the biggest reasons that I voted for it was it preserved the ability of LGBT people to serve in the military. It preserved the Defense Department's clean energy program against Republican efforts to repeal it. That's the authorizing, the policy portion of it. The appropriations bill that spends the money, I voted against. Also, my bill on Russia does not say that we should spend more money in Europe. My bill on Russia says that we shouldn't let Russia interfere in our elections without responding to it. It's primarily focused on cyber and on disinformation campaigns, which is what Russia has specialized in. And personally, I think making sure that Russia does not once again influence our election or influence elections across Europe, for that matter, is enormously important. So while I'm all in favor of spending less money on defense, to say that we have no national security needs that impact our country, I think that's wrong. And I think you got to be able to balance that while at the same time, yes, meeting the domestic needs. And I'll tell you one of the best ways to meet the domestic needs, raise taxes. I voted against all of the Bush tax cuts. The Trump tax cut is absolutely ridiculous. But if we had gotten rid of the Bush tax cuts, that would give us more revenue. I also support scrapping the cap and raising it on Social Security so that we can preserve Social Security for at least the next 100 years. So generating more revenue is also an incredibly important part of funding the priorities that Sarah correctly lays out.
So that you mentioned elections, let me just ask quickly. Firstly, do you have a source where we can go and confirm the information in regard to Russia specifically interfering with our elections, and how? Do you have a link that we could go to, a URL, anywhere?
I don't have it off the top of my head. There are countless stories. I mean, I get it from Intel committee briefs and from a whole host of stories about, what's most recently breaking is what they did with, I think it was Facebook, where they opened up phony accounts and started phony news stories. I mean, they started the whole news story about how Hillary Clinton was supposedly running a child sex ring out of a pizzeria in Washington, D.C. that got retweeted to the point where people believed it. There is no one specific URL, but there is a whole lot of evidence about Russia did to try to influence our election.
So question, as far as elections go, and this is to both of you, before the alleged Russia interference, do you believe that we have other issues in regard to the validity and integrity of our U.S. elections?
Yes. Sorry,
it's okay, and I'll just sneak in. What would you say the top two issues?
The two biggest issues are, number one, voter suppression. The efforts, and this happened in key states. In Wisconsin alone, 300,000 people were turned away from the polls because they didn't have the proper ID. They're doing this in Michigan. They're doing it in Pennsylvania, in North Carolina. Republican state after Republican state is purging people from the rolls, requiring IDs, and making it very, very difficult for people to vote. And not coincidentally, this disproportionately impacts the poor and people of color. We won this last election, except for voter suppression. Number two is redistricting and gerrymandering. There were more votes for Democratic members of Congress nationwide than for Republican members of Congress. And yet they have a 45-seat majority because of gerrymandering and voter suppression. Those are the two biggest issues in order to, I think, make our electoral system more fair and balanced and inclusive.
I'd agree with Congressman Smith on those two major issues as far as gerrymandering and voter suppression. We're very fortunate in the state of Washington that we have our mail-in ballots, which I think is amazing. And my friends across the country are always amazed when I talk about it. But I think even more than that, one of the problems that we have with our current system is the way we do voting, period. So by implementing something, I'm a big supporter for ranked choice voting, because right now we have this forced dichotomy of two parties, which is Republican versus Democrat, and those are your only real options. So even if we address gerrymandering, even if we address voter suppression, we're still not addressing one of the core issues, which is the chokehold of the two-party system on our current political system. Right now, there's no possible way for a third-party candidate to become viable, but a ranked choice voting system is proven across the world in other first world countries to be effective in providing opportunities to third parties to truly become viable and actually allow differences in opinion and allow a broader spectrum of opinions to come to the table. It allows for a lot more room for these different voices to come and share this table. And I think that in addition to just gerrymandering and voter suppression, we also need to look at the way that we vote in general. And implementing a ranked choice system is one of the ways that we can help combat all of that.
Representative Smith, is there room for a third person at the table, a third party at the table?
Well, I think there is a real problem that we have devolved into a two-party system. I don't know that ranked choice voting really helps third parties. I'm not opposed to it. Something certainly we can take a look at. But I think to really get outside of the two-party system, what I really care about is putting forward a progressive agenda. And right now, what I think we ought to be focused on is making the Democratic Party more progressive in its agenda. I think you run a real risk in a third-party situation of splitting off votes and enabling the Republicans to win. But if a ranked choice voting system could get us more diversity, that's fine. But I'll tell you, I still think that the two things that I mentioned are vastly more important right now in terms of how people are being, their votes are not being, they're not being allowed to vote, and then their vote is not being counted as much as it should be.
Okay, and last, in regard to the elections, being that all of the machines are proprietary, meaning when it comes to an audit, the people are not allowed to look at the results. What do you think about that?
I think that lacks a certain element of transparency, quite frankly. I think it opens up the door to things like fraud. That's where things like fraud happen. But the reality is we need to have these kinds of paper trails that people can look at and view. We need to have this kind of transparency. We need to have this kind of openness. Even if they are proprietary, people still should have the ability to know the results. It's part of our democracy, is knowing the results of our elections, and that should include and be extended to audits.
Representative Smith, how do you feel about the fact that they're proprietary?
I completely agree with that. And actually, I've worked on a piece of legislation for a number of years that the Republicans have crushed that we've been unable to pass. Rush Holt, actually, was a former member of Congress from New Jersey who did this. It says, if you have a computer system, you should have to have a paper receipt so that when you go in and vote, you get a printed out paper receipt. You can look at it and say, yes, this is the way I intended to vote. You can hold on to that paper receipt. Right now, the scary situation we have, and I agree with you also, there should be no proprietary software. If you're going to be a computer or software company that says, I'm providing you with the system that's going to allow for your elections, then you have to open that architecture to make sure the system is fair and transparent. But more than that, you have to have that paper receipt. Because if you don't have a paper receipt, if somebody has gone in and hacked the system and changed the votes, there's no ability to do a recount, because all you're doing is recounting the hacked results. Whereas if you had a paper receipt that every county had to hold on to, and we've done that, we've done this for years, it's slow and it's tedious, and I know Dino Rossi in particular is not fond of it, but it is an effective means of making sure that every vote is counted and counted correctly. And we need a paper receipt with every voting machine, and this ought to be a federal law, because it impacts federal elections, to make sure that if there is some question, we can have a valid recount, and that a hacked computer can't effectively wipe out somebody's vote and change the outcome.
So let me ask, are either of you familiar with open source technology as it would pertain to elections?
Yes.
And would you support that?
Yes, absolutely.
Yes to both.
Sarah? You say yes? Sarah?
Yes to both.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, let's go to the group chat from Rhonda Walker. What about expanding the top 2 after primary, she asks. Sarah, you want to?
Just for some clarification, I just had a clarifying question. So expanding the top 2, so it becomes, are asking for like a top 3 primary, or what specifically?
Yeah, 3 to 4, getting it past that top 2. That top 2 is really what hurts us. The open primaries is fabulous, but then, you know, we're stuck with just ends up being, you know, top 2 established. We want to really bring in third options when you do expand that to a top 3 to 4. How do you guys feel about that?
That's a good question. It's actually not something that I've considered, is expanding the top 2 primary. It's definitely something that I want to look into before I make a firm commitment to anything, because I want to be more well versed on that and the effects that could have, because then you run into the whole question about splitting and things like that. So it's definitely something that I want to do more research into before I commit.
Yeah, I guess the only question I have on that is, would you still require the ultimate winner to have 50% plus 1? And this is something that different elections do in different ways. But the reason you go to the top 2 is to make sure that whoever wins has majority support. If you have, and this didn't used to be the case. In the state of Washington, we didn't have top 2. We had, you know, top Democrat, top Republican, and then you would have any other party and as many independents as you wanted. So people do want to help. I won my first election against Randy Tate with 49% of the vote, because there was a third party candidate, I can't even remember the party that he was running under, that got 3% of the vote. So that's the debate, is if you go to 3, 4, 5, 6, you can have someone win conceivably with like 40% of the vote, as opposed to the majority. That would be the big question I would want answered on that approach.
And I think part of my question then back would be one of these issues is a forced majority therefore truly a majority? Because it circles back to ranked choice voting, because something like ranked choice voting would pretty much take care of a primary, when we wouldn't really have to have the conversation of a top 2, top 3 kind of primary.
Yeah, and sorry to do this, but just in case people don't understand what ranked choice voting is, there is no primary in ranked choice voting. Let's say there's 6 candidates running. Everybody votes in November, and they rank 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And you go through and you count, and whoever comes in last is dropped out. And then that candidate's, all the people who voted for that candidate, whoever their second choice is, that gets added back in. And then you drop the next person and do the same thing. So that your second choice, and in some cases, I suppose your third or fourth choice, can wind up being ultimately the choice. So, you know, you vote for the candidate who comes in 6th, your vote is not wasted, because your second choice then gets plugged in. And actually, they tried that in Pierce County a dozen years ago now, 15 years ago, something like that. They got rid of it fairly quickly, because the only thing it did, unfortunately, in Pierce County, and I forget the name of the guy, but it was a guy who perpetually ran for every office, who had multiple criminal offenses against him. And he wound up through the ranked choice system being elected to Pierce County assessor, where he set about to commit all manner of crimes and was eventually impeached and tossed out. And then Pierce County got rid of ranked choice voting. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that it wouldn't work more broadly, but that is one of the risks, is when you put 2 choices in front of people, at least they know what those 2 choices are. If you got 6 people in the race and you're picking your second and third choice, you know, I agree with Sarah. It would definitely expand the type of people who would get elected. And in that sense, given the disenfranchisement that a lot of people are feeling, that could be a positive thing. But you got to sort of look at the history of it and see how to make it work in the best possible way.
Awesome. We have a couple of great questions coming up here I want to get in. The next one is from Georgia Davenport, who is a powerful activist here with Whole Washington, our state single payer. And she has asked, do you support the anti-BDS bill? Section 4A1 reads, to oppose restrictive trade practices or boycotts fostered or imposed by foreign countries, or request to impose restrictive trade practices or boycotts by foreign countries. against other countries friendly to the United States or against any United States person. So basically, this is saying an organization or a country could be sued for boycotting, say, Saudi Arabia for its treatment of women. This is a serious issue.
Let me
How do you feel about it, Representative Smith?
Yeah. The bill in question focuses primarily on Israel, and it is an incredibly complicated issue, as I have discovered. I do not support boycotting Israel. I have criticized them for their settlements. I just met with a Palestinian activist who I think is being unfairly charged with crimes when he's doing a nonviolent protest. I've spoken out against Israeli practices. I support a two-state solution. I think boycotting and divesting from Israel hurts Palestinians and hurts the peace process. But then a bunch of people came to me, and the ACLU put out a memo, and I met with the ACLU just last week, actually, and they weren't 100% accurate in their memo. They made it sound like if you as an individual were simply to stand up and say that you wanted to boycott Israel, you could be thrown in jail. That's not what this bill does. And it would really be complicated to get into all the details of this, but it goes back to a 1979 law when the Arab states were boycotting Israel, and they passed a law that said businesses cannot join in that boycott. Individuals are allowed to say what they want. Even businesses are allowed to do what they want. They just can't join in the boycott led by a foreign country. The bill that is now in Congress expands that to contemplate possible boycotts from intergovernmental agencies like the UN or the European Union. And now there is no boycott at this moment from either one of them, but this would expand it to include them. So this goes back to 1979. Now, a lot of people are telling me this is going to throw individuals in jail if they say they're against Israel. I've looked at it 1,000 times. After initially seeing the ACLU memo, I was like, well, I don't want that. So I said I wouldn't support the bill. But then I looked at it and saw that that's not true. It focuses on commercial activities. And since 1979, when this law was put in place, no individual or business or person in a business has been imprisoned. A couple have been fined. It's really a statement of U.S. policy that says we don't support boycotting Israel. Just like, for instance, we do support boycotting North Korea. So if you were to do business with North Korea, you would be in violation of the law. It's an instrument of foreign policy. I don't believe that this law would apply to Saudi Arabia in that sense. I think it was pretty well specific, but I'll have to go back and look at that particular piece of it. And in any event, even if it isn't, any individual, any person, any business can say, I'm not doing business with them because I don't like the way, don't like anything about them, for that matter. It's just a matter of whether or not you join in an internationally organized boycott against Israel.
Okay, Sarah.
So I think that the scope of this bill in general it grossly misrepresents the effect of globalism in the 21st century. So this bill limits Americans' ability to participate in a global society where we want to speak out on moral issues. So it really shouldn't matter where the message on these moral issues is coming from. Americans should be able to use their money to speak out on human rights violations as they see fit. End of story. To limit that ability to utilize that speech in any way is to infringe on speech. And even with freedom of speech aside, there's another issue at stake that you run into with this bill, where the anti-BDS bill prevents companies from complying with international human rights laws. So if the UN chooses to sanction Israel, now corporations that are global have to contend with this problem of working within the confines of those human rights violations and any sanctions that are put upon them, and having American consumers be able to participate in those markets. The fact of the matter is, we are allowed to use our dollars to speak out on moral issues. We should be allowed to use those dollars and speak out on moral issues as we the American people see fit. And if other businesses in America choose to join us in that, or choose to join other companies in that should be their prerogative. We shouldn't be legislating who we can and cannot side with, who we can and cannot support, and who we can and cannot take a moral stance against. It's just wrong.
Okay.
Two points about that, if I could. First of all, again, individuals and businesses are allowed to do this. They're simply not allowed to join. And I think Sarah made that point clear. They're not allowed to join. You know, if the United Nations came out tomorrow and said, we're boycotting Israel, we would come out against that. So that is true. But they still have the freedom to do that. But the second thing is, this is an element of foreign policy. If you want to take the extreme freedom approach that Sarah just described, then we should not be able to prevent businesses from doing business with North Korea. Or back in the day with South Africa. If they wanted to do it, they ought to be able to do it. Who are we to tell them they shouldn't? So I think an element of U.S. foreign policy is to say countries we support, countries we don't, and to speak out against it. Otherwise, as I said, I mean, do we really want businesses or take Myanmar, for example, right now? What they're doing to the Rohingya in that country is abhorrent. Should the U.S. government not be able to set a policy that says, you know, we're not going to do business with them because of what they're doing? I do believe that an element of foreign policy is to call out the countries that we don't think we want to support and decide which countries those are.
Okay, I think I'll punctuate this last topic with a comment from Dave Strider, who says genocide in Yemen equals boycott Saudi. The next question is just going to be a yes or no question, and this is from Oz. And Oz asks, is Medicare for All a litmus test for the candidates in 2018? Representative Smith, yes, no?
I'm not, well, I support Medicare for All. I think a litmus test should be, do you support universal access to health care? And a litmus test should be, do you oppose the efforts to totally tear apart the ACA? And let me just say on Medicare for All, I know he said it was a yes or no question, but nothing in the field of health care is a yes or no question. In Germany, in France, in Switzerland, I think the Netherlands, they all have great healthcare systems that cover everybody, that are not single payer. They are not. So if we came up with a system like Germany's or France, and from the books that I've read, actually France is sort of thought of as having the best healthcare system. So we could not adopt France's healthcare system because we said it's single payer or nothing. Now look, I support Medicare for All. I'm wide open to a bunch of different ideas for getting to universal access, but limiting it to just one as a litmus test, I think that would be a mistake in terms of A, building the coalition we need to build to win elections, and B, actually getting to having everybody in this country covered as they should be.
Before Sarah answers, I'll just input that Squar, S-K-A-U-R, I know I'm probably mispronouncing that, says, I have access to a Porsche, I just can't afford it. Sarah, would you?
No. I'm not just talking about access. I'm talking about actually having health insurance. Let me be 100% clear on that. You know, and by the way, I disagree with the definition of access. You don't have access to a Porsche if you can't afford it. If you don't have it, you don't have access to it.
Well, saying
I don't
that
have
you
access
can have it if you have the money.
No,
So-
no, I don't. I do not support that type of healthcare system. You
So-
have to have a system where everybody is covered, no matter whether they can afford it or not. I want to be 100% clear on that.
So, yes, I do believe it's a litmus test. And yes, I believe that any progressive worth their salt, any Democrat worth their salt, has a moral obligation to support single payer Medicare for All, HR 676. This bill has been introduced since 2003 every single year. Our healthcare situation has been getting worse and worse and worse. And we had a supermajority of Democrats in the House and the Senate and in the White House. And this bill was being put forward. We had an opportunity to provide single payer Medicare for all Americans, and we could have solved this problem. But we didn't have representatives in office who were bold enough to step forward and say, this is what what we want. This is what the people need. We have a moral argument here that we need to protect people. We have an obligation to people. We have a duty to our fellow Americans to provide them health care. This is a basic human need, and the government should be meeting its obligation to provide access to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness in the form of health insurance. All people deserve access to health care. All people deserve a single payer system. Now, if you want to have private systems around that one, that's fine. Let them fend for themselves. But at the end of the day, we need to have a single payer system that's going to cover all Americans, regardless of their income, regardless of their life status. This is an urgent issue. This is something we need to take care of now. We need to take care of sooner rather than later, because we can't wait another 13 years for a bill like this to come up. We have an opportunity and we need to seize it for single payer universal Medicare for all.
Indeed. Okay.
And let me just say on healthcare Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, if you can make it real quick, because we have a few really great questions I want to get in.
That's fine. I'll let it go. Take the next questions.
Okay. We would like to know how you both feel about socialized higher education.
I actually just had the opportunity to do a live stream through Justice Democrats about this exact issue. I am a huge supporter of access to publicly funded, debt-free higher education, not low-cost, debt-free public education. And in addition to just college, I don't think the College for All Act goes enough. I think we need to really bring in vocational schools, technical schools. We have a lot of people that are gifted in trades, and we need to be embracing them into this fold and bring them up to speed and not saddle them with debt. I could talk about the figures forever. I'm very well versed in these figures, but a $1.44 trillion student debt bubble with 11.2% of students who are currently in default is economically unsustainable. And this is one of these issues that we've seen Congress constantly pawn off on administration after administration. We keep seeing this problem change hands. It didn't just start with millennials. It didn't just start with the younger generations. There are people in their 60s who are currently having their Social Security garnished because of unpaid student debt. This is a problem that's been going on for a long time. Congress has just been choosing to ignore it and then blaming the administration. The College for All Act came up in 2015, and nobody stepped in to co-sponsor it. This has been something that's been talked about for years. And quite honestly, if you haven't been fighting for publicly funded college education, you haven't really been fighting for students, because we've been watching these tuition rates hike up 6%, 10% every single year at UW alone. When before tuition was frozen in 2013, it was going up at the rate of 5 times the rate of inflation. So this is a long-standing problem that we've just been ignoring and pawning off and giving these half measures and these half steps and these partial solutions, these half-formed solutions for students. But the problem has been getting worse because no one has been bold enough to bring forward legislation until now, until 2015, and especially under the watchful eyes of Pramila Jayapal, been bold enough to bring this legislation to the floor to give us this publicly funded, debt-free educational option. So I absolutely support publicly funded higher education. I think it's going to open doors and help communities of color. It's going to bring up lower income families. It's going to allow displaced workers to train for new trades, to actually re-enter the economy. So as our entire economy changes from manufacturing into hopefully a green energy economy, we're going to be able to train up workers that are being displaced in these areas. They're going to have opportunities. Education is the cornerstone of what the American dream is all about. My dad came here from the United Kingdom with just an education, and he built my entire life. It's why my parents were so enthusiastic about me getting my education, my sisters getting her education. It's such a crucial, important thing for people to have. It's one of the biggest ways we can bridge the income inequality gap. All of our problems can circle back to collegiate education and higher education. I absolutely I'm in support of publicly funded public education. I will talk about it until I have no more breath left in my body, but I am 1,000% behind it, enthusiastically and emphatically, from day one of my campaign up through whenever my last day in office is.
Thank you, Sarah. Representative?
Yeah, no, I think I believe in public education as well. I mean, my father was a baggage handler at United Airlines, and I was literally the first in my family to go to college. And, you know, the grants and loans, actually, my father died when I was a sophomore in college, and the grants and loans that were made available to me enabled me to make it through college. Now, I worked for United Parcel Service for the whole time that I was in college, so I, you know, paid a portion of it myself as well, but the help that was there enabled me to get that college education. And that was back in the time when it was a heck of a lot cheaper than it is right now. So access to higher education is incredibly important, and we have got to provide the funds to help get there. And I think the funding mechanism that Senator Sanders came up with, the idea of taxing Wall Street trades, is brilliant. Kills two birds with one stone. So, you know, going after some of the worst behavior we have in the financial markets to raise money for a very good cause. The other thing that I'll say, I think the most important thing that Sarah said there was that it shouldn't just be college. And that is one of the things that concerned me early on in the debate. If we're going to pay for everyone to go to college, the trades and vocational and apprenticeships, every little bit is important. And there are a ton of jobs out there that are going unfilled because we don't have people with the skills to fill them. Unions do a tremendous job in the apprenticeship program. You know, if we're going to say we'll pay for you to go to college, we ought to just as quickly say we'll also pay for your apprenticeship program. We'll pay for your training program, for your vocational program. Unless this approach is comprehensive in that way, then we're not really reaching the people we need to reach and putting them in the jobs that they're going to want, that are going to be best for them, and are going to pay very well. So I applaud Sarah for mentioning the vocational side of it, because that's critical and something that we just, you know, we have not paid attention to on the local, state, or even federal level to the degree that we should.
Thank you. This is a three-fer. This is a three-parter. So if you need me to repeat any one of them, please let me know. First is, do you support repealing the authorization for use of military force that allows the president to go into war unilaterally? That's one. Do you support repealing the Patriot Act? Is two. And finally, how much do you believe we should invest in our infrastructure?
I'll go in reverse order if I could. I think we should invest hundreds of billions of dollars in our infrastructure, and the only way we're going to do it is raise taxes. You know, Donald Trump's pie in the sky private approach was ridiculous. You know, the gas tax has been steadily producing less revenue. We have got to raise taxes to invest in our infrastructure. I actually applaud the state legislature for having done it, for having raised the gas tax to help fund some infrastructure improvements. But the federal government has just been totally dropping the ball on this. I have introduced my own bill. You know, whatever the revenue source, I'm pretty much in favor of it if it's going to fund building more roads and bridges and infrastructure in this country. I've had my own bill for a decade now. It's a flat fee on the bill of lading of containers coming into the country, no matter where they come into, that would raise money to help build the roads and bridges. So we need a massive infrastructure bill. In fact, this ridiculous $1.5 trillion tax cut that they're talking about, they should get rid of it. They should increase taxes by $1.5 trillion and spend it on infrastructure. You go all across this country, it's crumbling. On the Patriot Act, I support repealing most of it. There are a few pieces of it that are, you know, and I have to go back and look at it. But I certainly don't support all of the warrantless stuff that was allowed. For me, that's what it comes down to. We have a court system. You know, if you want to look at someone's library records, you want to look at whatever records, you have to get a warrant. And that is what is needed on that. On repealing the AUMF, the AUMF is what gave the president, well, it's really complicated, but Congress did pass the AUMF to give the president the authority to go after the 9/11 attackers. And, you know, I supported that. You know, I mean, it was 9/11, it was Afghanistan, we need to do that. Since that time, Presidents Bush, Obama, and Trump have taken that to expand the war all across the globe. So I think we should repeal the AUMF. Now, I'll be honest with you, we do still face a terrorist threat. ISIS, Al-Qaeda, there are groups that are plotting and planning attacks against us. So we should repeal the existing AUMF and have the president come to us and say, this is the authority I need, but it needs congressional approval. Bootstrapping everything back to the 2001 AUMF has, in fact, done what your questioner said. it has given the president unlimited authority to commit military to attacks from Libya to Somalia to Yemen to all over the place, without any congressional oversight and without the type of oversight that is necessary.
So let me just, before I answer, I want to respect the thread here, and someone is, and it's Scour, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name, is saying, you know, in confusion, but Representative Smith, you voted to repeal the estate tax in 2011. So do you have a comment on that?
Oh, that's absolutely 100% untrue. I don't know where the hell you got it. I have never voted to repeal the estate tax. In fact, you know, when in 2011 is when the Bush tax cuts expired, I voted against the deal that Barack Obama cut to extend them. So, you know, I don't know where that's coming from, but I have never, ever voted to repeal the estate tax. And like I said, even the half-assed deal that they did that allowed 90% of the Bush tax cuts to stay in place, I voted against that because I thought they should have all been repealed.
And do you believe generally that as far as taxes go, that it should be the upper 1% that pay their fair share and leave all the rest of us alone? How do you feel about that?
Well, look, I'm sorry, because Sarah has a chance to answer the question that was asked. But let me just be clear here. No, okay? The bottom 99% has also, you know, not at the really at the bottom end, but a lot of people in the 50 to 99% have gotten unbelievable tax cuts over the course of the last 15 to 16 years as well. I'm in that group. You know, the per-child tax cuts, the reduction in the rates, all that other stuff. Look, the Bush tax cuts did in fact apply to people outside of the 1%. I do not agree with the notion that we should simply not tax the bottom 99% and hope that we should get it all from the one. We will not have enough money to pay for health care, to pay for college, to pay for infrastructure, to pay for what we need as a society. So no, I'm not going to say that the bottom 99% get to not pay any taxes, because if you do that, all that stuff that Sarah was talking about earlier about funding college education, funding vocational education, you can forget about it because you're not going to have the revenue to do it.
Well, just to be clear, not to not pay at all, but just not increase, as this latest Trump tax
that's a very specific piece of it. What Trump does, which is just monumentally evil, is in addition to cutting the top rate, he actually raises the bottom rate. The bottom rate is 10%. He raises it to 12. Okay, I don't support that. But the question was, is it just the 1% that should be taxed? Yeah, I'm sorry, we can't let 99% of the people in this country, you know, not pay tax.
Sarah, do you need me to repeat that question?
No, I opened up a notepad and I was like, I'm going to jot this down real quick. So, do I believe in repealing the AUMF? Absolutely, I do. I mean, Representative Barbara Lee said that she saw exactly where it was going. We didn't need it to fight terrorism then. We don't need it to fight terrorism now. All that it's done is it's managed to get us into 7 different undeclared wars. The purview of Congress is to debate war and declare war, and we haven't formally done that since 1944 when we entered into World War II. So we haven't been formally declaring wars, we've just been occupying and we've been going in on missions. But what we need right now is we need someone in Congress who's going to rein that in. It is unsustainable for us to keep going into all these wars over and over again, stretching our military thin, our resources thin, our people thin. We cannot keep doing this. Right now, we are facing a crisis of economic stagnation. We need to turn our focus inwards, and we need to focus on the people, because when you're facing economic stagnation, the only proven way in order to combat that is to turn around and invest in your people. Right now, the AUMS, as it stands, could send us into even more unauthorized wars, and we need to make sure that we're bringing this back to Congress, and Congress is actually doing its duty and debating these wars before we're even sending any kind of military operation in as needed. As for the Patriot Act, yes, I support repealing the Patriot Act. I think that we've become a long way since we first put it into place. And I know that Representative Smith voted as recently to extend the sunset provisions as 2015, I believe, was the last vote that he voted yay on. But it's been a consistent vote. And I think
not true.
Pardon?
I haven't voted to extend the Patriot Act since about 2007.
Okay.
But go ahead.
That's fine. So, but as of right now, where we stand right now, the Patriot Act really doesn't have a place in modern society. We've been giving up our civil liberties for long enough in the name of fighting terrorism. In 2014, 32 people died to acts of terrorism, but 33,599 people died because of firearms right here at home. So we have other problems that we need to turn around and face and deal with other than the Patriot Act. We need to get ourselves out of the private lives of our citizens. We need to stop playing Big Brother. We need to back out of this surveillance state that we're trying to build up. It's just time. It's long overdue. It's long past time. We survived well before for a very long time without this kind of surveillance. We will continue to do so in a modern society. And as for your last question, how much do you think we should invest in our infrastructure? Well, the American Society of Civil Engineers says we should invest $4.6 trillion just to catch up. So that's the amount of money that I support investing in our infrastructure, because we should be doing more than just catching up.